that same. That's the first time I ever been there. It was good. You know, it was really good. Just like they're playing BLT.
I like BLTs. Every once in a while I'll make one of them. I don't know why.
Something about them. I don't know. It's good.
Yeah, it's down easy too.
Mm-hmm. This one, and then we'll have another break for about an hour.
Give me that printout. I just printed in the, can you? Oh, okay.
Damn, my tomorrow stuff I did.
Oh,
It's tomorrow. What happened? What you need?
no, I didn't start the video.
Oh,
So I could. There's only one person that didn't do the video yet. I'm like,
I know why, because you didn't say it's not just kidding.
Great, it's just gone 2 o'clock. So Graham, do you have any announcements you want to use to kick us off and get us started before we dive in?
I don't. We'll have a brief one at the end about upcoming sessions, but I think you could get us started.
Wonderful.
Beth.
So, thank you. Welcome, everybody. For those who joined late, just a repetition of the announcement that was made earlier, that you can right-click on your own square in the top right-hand corner to pull up a menu that will allow you to change your name if you want to add your affiliation or add your first name or last name or your pronouns or whatever you want to enable us to communicate today, but also, as Graham mentioned earlier, to be able to make sure that we have a record of your being here for the certificates that we give out afterwards. Also, at the bottom of the screen, you'll find a button that says reactions. And under that button that says reactions, if you take a look at it, it has lots of fun things like hearts like this and smiley faces. But more importantly, it actually has the button that says raise hand. So please, if you'd like to chime in, we don't want this to be a lecture. We want it to be a conversation. We definitely want to hear from you. So please, by all means, use the electronic raise hand button, or you can just wave at us, or you can use the chat feature to say that you would like to chime in at any point. Since the goal of these classes is really to have a conversation about skills that we can apply to helping us improve the work that we do in the state of New Jersey. So let me go ahead and try to full screen my slides here. All good visually? Thumbs up. Thank you so much.
Looks good.
Awesome. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Beth Noveck. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the state of New Jersey, and I have been for the last several years now. Time flies when you're having fun. Our office, Graham and Cassie are part of that, and Graham, whom you've already heard from. We might have Ed here on the line. Anybody who's labeled with innovation comes from our team. We are the state's mighty engine that could. We are a small shop that leverages and brings together people with a variety of different skills in technology, in data, in policy, and in design to be able to work on solving hard problems more effectively, more equitably, and when we can, also faster. An experience that I think many of us have had during COVID. And so we try to leverage the experiences that we've had, that we've learned about from working with so many of our colleagues across state agencies, to then deliver back to our colleagues shared lessons and learnings about how we can all do better in terms of how we deliver policies and services. So as public officials across the states, and we have here not only public servants from the state of New Jersey, but I think we're going to have people here from California and potentially Pennsylvania and Rhode Island and several of the other states who are a part of our new consortium, learning consortium, that comprises 6 states, Rhode Island, California, Pennsylvania, Colorado, and Maine, as well as New Jersey, are collaborating with one another to engage and embark on these learning journeys to explore what are the 21st century skills and talents that we can leverage in order to do better at serving the residents of our states. So we have a lot of work to do. We have hard problems to solve, sometimes known as wicked problems. Because they are problems where we don't always agree on what the solution is. We frankly don't even always agree on what the problem is. And we definitely don't agree on how to get between one and the other. So I would say all of the work that we do as public servants falls into this bucket of hard problems or wicked problems, problems that the United Nations and its member countries have agreed can be categorized into these nifty 17 categories. And it helps to have, I think, a number chart and a logo for each one. But essentially, it's a great way to just encapsulate the many challenges that we face and that we work on in our jobs. So those problems, of course, are often very acute. They're very time sensitive, like COVID, where we have to do something yesterday to be able to tackle the problem. They may be emergent, again, urgent issues relating to climate, where we have, again, work that we need to do immediately to be able to get the problem solved faster. But then there are also just the chronic challenges that we tackle, whether it's the chronic and ongoing and sustained problem of climate change or of racial justice or injustice and systemic racism, or whether it's challenges of economic inequality that have plagued us now for generations. Or the problem that I think worries so many of us today, especially since the insurrection on January 6th, the question of whether our democratic institutions have the staying power to be able to respond to these challenges and to be able, again, to respond in ways that are democratic and participatory and equitable. So we got a lot of problems, but we're here really to talk about how do we solve them. And more importantly, not only how we come up with good ideas for how to solve them, but how we actually implement changes faster. I don't know about you, but I find that in my job that we frequently have a good idea for what to do, and then everything grinds to a halt when it comes time to figure out how do we get the procurement out the door, how do we get the website stood up, how do we get the policy through the hoops that we need to do. Implementation can be really, really difficult. So what we do in these 1-hour sessions is to really focus on the skills needed to enable execution, to enable implementation in practice, not just the new idea or the invention or the nifty policy thing that we may read about in a think tank newsletter, but to really grapple together as a community with what we can do to speed up execution and implementation. So the skill that we're talking about today is problem definition. And it is just one of many of what I would call 21st century skills that we tackle in these workshops and in the free online platform that's accessible to all of you, and with more resources, of course, available online, and which I'll share more of after the fact. So essentially, though, I just wanted to situate our conversation before we really dive in on the practice of the problems of the problem definition process, is to kind of situate it in time as the first step in a multi-step process that progresses from problem definition to identifying solutions, to implementing solutions, to then evaluating the solutions. So just as a shorthand, everything that we talk about in our skills conversations focuses on ways that we can use data and ways that we can use more equitable forms of engagement to be able to improve how we do each of these things. So that's the kind of top line, one-line summary of what we do in our innovation skills programs. And we bring to you then different introductions to skills in 1-hour formats during the course of the week. and encourage you to sign up for more of these and also to suggest more things that you would like to do. So let me dive in here on the problem definition piece. And I will say right off the bat that we're going to talk about the introduction to problem definition today. It has multiple pieces and parts to it. In other words, we have a whole separate conversation that we embark on, which is really about how do I use data to get sharper and more accurate about the problem? How do I use what designers call human-centered design to really test my problem definition with people? So it's a bigger topic, which we have more conversations about. But today we'll dive in on the concept of problem definition. And I'm sure many of you have seen this quote that I think really encapsulates the idea that we need to spend time on defining the problem, not just jumping into the solution. So why do we have to do that is the question. And that's what we set out to answer today, is why problem definition actually matters, why we need to do it, why you should be here for an hour, and why I would encourage you to talk about problem definition with your teams. But then also the question of how we can apply more participatory and more equitable approaches to defining the problem that we're trying to solve. So let me pause here for a moment and just say that because the slides are on, I can't see all of you. So please, at any point, you should feel free to interject, interrupt, paste in the chat. Would love to hear from you about your own experiences and also any questions that you have or any reactions that you have from your own work. I by no means have a monopoly on all the good ideas. And I think a lot of us have been learning how to define the problem in our own work and in our jobs. So classic kind of example here that I think all of us are very familiar with is obviously the challenge of mask wearing during COVID. This is one of those things that so many jurisdictions have grappled with. How do we solve this? What solutions do we come up with? And sorry, that is not my cell phone. That is a landline that I cannot reach. So it's going to go off for a minute in the background. My apologies. So it's the recognition that we have, though, is if we want to solve this problem, a lot is going to matter on what's the root cause, what's actually causing people not to wear masks in the first place. So if I were to ask you, I bet to put in the chat, why is it that people, do you think, don't wear masks or haven't worn masks during COVID, or that we've had only so much trouble? And Brian, I'll tell you, not only is that a landline, but if I could show it to you, it actually has a cord on it too. I am in my 90-year-old mother's house right now, and there is a landline with a cord. So I would show it to you if I could reach it. So I'm getting some answers here in the chat here. Jennifer, I'm sorry, says, we've got two people, Jackie and Jennifer, say, it's uncomfortable. We got lots of people saying hard to breathe, uncomfortable. Victor says political statement, or a sense that I have rights. I don't want to be told what to do. Hard to see, your glasses do fog up. You get the idea here, though, from the very, very different reactions to why people don't do it. Ooh, Alicia, interesting. Facial breakouts. That is a very interesting, I have a teenager who is dealing with the facial breakouts that come from mask wearing right now. So if anyone has a solution to that problem, I'd love to hear it. But please do put that in the chat as a completely a gratuitous addition to this thing here. But you can tell that depending on your view about what the problem is going to lead to a very, very different solution. So if the problem is that it's uncomfortable for people, your glasses are fogging up, or frankly, it's going to create acne for you, that's going to lead to one set of solutions. Very, very different than if the problem is that it's a political statement, that it's about rebellion, that it's about a sense of individual rights. These are going to lead to very, very different solutions. So I use this as sort of, I think for today, in the time in which we live, probably the most obvious kind of challenge that we've seen with trying to solve a problem, this problem, is that we're bringing solutions to the fore that don't respond to the problem, because the problem is not the thing that we think it is. So that's what we're really here to do, is to figure out how can I identify what the root cause is that I'm trying to tackle, and to be really clear about it. Now, right off the bat, let me say, that the answer is often all of the above. So the fact that you want to see people smile, or you want to, or that the challenge is people want to rebel, or individual rights, or acne, it might be all of these things. And therefore we have the challenge of trying to come up with multiple solutions that are responsive. Similarly, and it's similarly, yes, and you're right, there's some comments going on in the chat here about people don't even believe COVID exists, or they think it's a hoax, or, you know, going to be very different solutions. Or let's say the problem that people don't have access to masks. I was in a hospital yesterday visiting someone, and the person in front of me, the hospital hands out masks. They had a box there. The person in front of me reached in and took the entire contents of the box of masks. And the security guard was very unhappy that they had stolen effectively all of the masks. And I said, look, if they need the masks, if they are too poor to afford getting masks for themselves, and this will help them to wear masks, then we should be happy that they steal the contents of the box. So very different response. Similarly, and I think this cartoon makes, again, a similar point, you know, someone comes and says, we need to build a bridge at great expense to cross the river. If we actually pause to ask the question, what problem are we trying to solve? And the problem is, you know, I live on one side and I'm trying to get to work on the other side. In fact, the solution to this problem might not be a bridge. It might be a laptop that helps me log into work so that I don't have to cross the river. Or maybe, as the cartoon says, maybe it's a boat, would be a lot cheaper than building the bridge. So all of these just to illustrate that I think it's useful if we're going to come up with effective solutions. As John Dewey said, we have to actually spend some time on thinking about the problem. John Dewey, 100 years ago, wrote this book called How We Think, famous educational philosopher and father of constructivist learning, and really said that problem definition is the essence of learning, and is the thing that is the quintessential sort of form of self-reflection. I would put to us that it's really, really important for us to be clear about defining the problem, because it helps us to engage other people in solving it. If we're not clear about what we're trying to accomplish, it's very hard to go to other colleagues in our departments. It's hard to go to other agencies. It's hard to go to industry or universities or the public. And we know that we need collaborators to get things done faster and better. We can't do that if we're not clear about the problem we're trying to solve. Also, we're trying to solve what I would call public problems as opposed to private ones. So private ones, in other words, when the entrepreneur who's trying to make a buck wants to bring an idea to market, they're very often solving a problem that they suffer from personally. So the rollerboard suitcase was invented by a pilot who was sick of lugging his suitcase through the airport. So not surprisingly, having experienced the problem for himself, he came up with the solution, and boom, the industry was born. And thank goodness we now have wheels on our suitcases, which is hard to imagine how it took us as many years as it did to come up with the solution. But as public servants, we're very often solving problems for other people that we don't experience for ourselves. So our goal is to really come up with a process for really getting at the problems as people experience them, so that we can, again, come up with solutions that are responsive. So in short, it's not, the practice of it is complicated. The practice of it takes a lot of discipline, but in the end, it's really just about figuring out what's the problem we're solving, who is affected, and when and where does it occur. And so that's what I want us to try to unpack today in a process that I will say right off the bat is a multi-step process. It's never something that we do only once. It's something that we really have to repeat and keep going back to try to understand whether we have arrived at the true root cause of the problem, again, as people experience it. And if that is a root cause, we're in a good position to tackle. So you might liken it to the sculptor kind of finding the statue from within the block of marble, or you might liken it to the process of unpeeling the layers of an onion, where we're trying to peel back from a broader issue to more actionable, narrow, and defined problem. Okay, So now I want to dig in and actually start doing it. And I just want to put Brian on notice that I earlier volunteered him to let me call on him first, but I want to invite other people to chime in as well, but he is a willing victim, if that's okay, to really sort of help us dive in and talk about how we do this. So we're very lucky to have with us on the line today, Dr. Brian Bridges, who's the Secretary of Higher Education for the state of New Jersey. And so, Brian, I'm going to ask you if we can use you as a guinea pig, if you will, to tell us about an issue that you're grappling with in the office today so that we can talk about how we might help you define and refine the problem better that you're solving and get the group's help with doing that.
Sure, Beth. Glad to be here with everyone, and I'll try to be succinct. So we are launching a new initiative called the Some College No Degree to try to re-engage the almost 1 million people in the state of New Jersey who have stopped out and did not complete their degrees, whether it was 2-year degree, 4-year degree, and want to re-engage them so that they come back to campus or are incentivized to pursue some kind of credential so that they can earn a better wage, be more competitive in the job market, and really transform their lives. We know that some of these people ended up doing well after they dropped out, but we know that a large proportion of them did not. So we'd like to equip them with the credential or degree that will allow them to be a fuller participant in our economy. The big challenge with it is identifying these individuals and tracking them down and connecting with them in a way and connecting with them in a way that incentivizes them to want to re-engage. So yes, as Beth mentioned, we had a presentation earlier today where the unemployment rate in New Jersey is highest out of all people with different levels of educational attainment, even more so than people who have a high school diploma. Unemployment is highest amongst those with some college no degree. So that's our problem. How do we connect with these individuals when people have moved multiple times, often since they left their institution? Some of them have moved since COVID hit. So how do we identify them, connect with them, and re-engage them? That might be
okay. And fantastic. And that re-engagement, make sure I'm not on mute. Where are my controls here? You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thanks. I've lost the controls. So I think it's a really, really helpful problem for us to start from. And so what we want to do is to try to dig in a little bit to understand how that might help you unpack what it is that you're trying to accomplish here. And it seems to me that there are a couple of problems you've described or issues you've described here. One is how to reach people, and then the other is how to engage with them. In other words, how to convince them, presumably, to go back and finish college or get a credential of some kind, correct? Okay. So
Yes.
let me sort of walk you through this for a little bit, or have you walk us through this and invite the group to help us here. Is to ask you then, you've told us a little bit about what the problem is. Can you say a little bit more about when and where it occurs and who's impacted? And do you know that?
We know a little bit about this population, when and where it occurs. So we would assume, based on data that we have available, that the almost 1 million people in New Jersey range from people who started 30 years ago to those who might have started a few years ago. So it's been happening since college began, and it impacts, we know that this is a disproportionately lower income community with higher unemployment than the general population. We also know that about 40 to 50% of them are underrepresented minorities, and that almost 80% of them attended community colleges.
Okay, so that already is really helpful in terms of more specifically identifying the population. Do we know where in New Jersey they are? Since one of your challenges is how do we reach people? Are they in For people from other states, you may or may not have followed the comic debate in New Jersey about whether there is something called Central New Jersey or not. That is a favorite topic of jokes on our Twitter feed. But just for, without getting into that debate, are they in North, Central, or Southern New Jersey? And do we know that?
All of the above. They're
All of the above. Okay.
They're all over the state.
Let me ask people though here, and then let me ask you one more question. I want to invite the group to chime in too. I have a question here, which is the when question. Now that question may seem a little bit weird because there are problems that people face that, you know, happen in the fall or happen in the summer, or happen in the day, or happen at night. But there are lots of things we work on that are sort of, well, they happen to everybody all the time. What I mean by when, and sometimes it's a useful question, sometimes it's not, is the difference between kind of a chronic and an acute problem. So there's some problems that we're really trying to deal with like the right now versus something that's been unfolding over many generations and is a longer term problem. So is the when question relevant to you here? Is this something that has been picking up in recent years, that people have been dropping out? Has it been a generation long problem? How do you think about this in terms of time?
That's a great question. I think that it's been an ongoing problem for years. I mean, this is nationally, this number exceeds 36 million people. So we know that this is something that has been an issue for years. There's been more attention on it in the last decade or so. But I can't say for sure that it's picked up in pace over the last few years or more. I would say it's been an ongoing challenge.
Great. So that's it's a really interesting, maybe an interesting place to kind of dive in further to understand, are there specific populations where, or specific geographies where it has been picking up in time. You mentioned in a meeting we were at earlier today, someone with who had dropped out of engineering. Like, and engineering is, for example, notoriously difficult in terms of credits and very, very rigid requirements. So, you know, looking for specific places that we can narrow down the population. Let me say why that narrowing is so important. And this is where we're really sort of diving in on some very specific kind of how to grapple with this question of defining the problem. So step number one is to see if you can narrow it down. So let me, and so the reason to narrow it down, even though you may have a problem, whether it's, again, no degree, no credential, people who are, again, some college, no degree as the problem, or whether it's a completely different issue, even if it's a problem that affects, as you said, 36 million people nationally, and it affects all regions of the state, and it's a very ubiquitous problem, if we can get narrower, it can help us sometimes to uncover very practical solutions. So it can help us to uncover solutions that can work for specific populations. It can help us to better pilot things that we can try with a narrower population before we scale it to a broader one. It can help us, again, to figure out and understand the problem as people experience it. So if your challenge is, why are people dropping out? Why don't they finish those last 3 credits? Why don't they do that last year of college? If we start with everybody everywhere, then it becomes more difficult for us, A, to get the data, but B, also to go out and talk to people. So if I really want to understand why it's not happening, I might zero in on, let's look at the engineers who dropped out in the last 5 years in this region, because then it gives me a more specific population I can go talk to understand specifically what's going on with them. Kind of comparable quick example from something else we were doing in our work, which was focused on modernizing, making it easier for people to start and grow a business in New Jersey, working with the Business Action Center and the Department of State. And the way the Business Action Center has tackled this problem is to take specific categories of businesses. Like, let's start just with restaurants. Let's start just with pizza parlors. That's what we love in New Jersey. We love our pizza. Since we have other states here, I'm obliged to say we have the best pizza in the country. Another fighting matter, but allows us to then potentially dive in on solutions faster and more quickly.
So Beth,
Sometime, yeah, let me
I would
pause here.
say that,
Yes.
I would say that we have tried to narrow our approach a little bit by focusing, at least initially, on near completers. So people who are probably 10 to 15% away from finishing their degree. So for those who are pursuing four-year degrees, if they're a semester or two short, we would focus on them. And then those at two-year institutions, if they're basically 18 hours or so short, we'd focus on them.
So that's fantastic. And it's great, again, to have the data to be able to do that. And I imagine many people here, though, are working on challenges where they don't have access to data, which can even allow them to create these smaller segments. So welcome questions about that now or after, about how would you begin to identify how to narrow down. I'm going to keep going, but I want to invite people in the chat, as they're starting to do already, to begin to give you suggestions, because I think you're going to, hopefully will leave you with some good ideas here. So we want to make sure, again, that it's narrow enough, as it says here, to be solvable, so that we come up with something practical that we can do quickly. And that's another great reason to narrow down. Even if we don't solve the whole problem for everybody, we build a lot of goodwill, we build a lot of trust, we build a lot of the things that we need to be able to get the higher ups to say yes to things when we can show progress more quickly than if we try to tackle the whole of the problem, which takes us 5 years to get our arms around, and we don't get anything done. It's why in places like South Australia, they have an office called the 90-Day Projects Office, and it is devoted solely to helping public servants take 90-day projects from start to finish. And it most of the time is spent on defining a very narrow problem that you can tackle in 90 days. So kind of creating these smaller increments allows us to have a sense of accomplishment, and again, to get things done more quickly. So a quick example here, this one from the Freakonomics podcast, if you ever listened to that, with Stephen Dubner. He talks about this example of trying to tackle challenges of poor educational outcomes among rural school children in China. Now, when you say educational outcomes in China, already that's, so big as to be just too big to do anything with. So long story short, they ended up drilling down on the much, much narrower problem of the specific category of children who have trouble seeing the board. And what that did then was unlock the very narrow, kind of easy solution of donating eyeglasses and getting those to, again, 300 children, I think it says here, in Yunnan province is where they started, but allowed for making a dent in the problem, even if it wasn't tackling the whole problem, just by, again, carving off this little small bits in the problem. Again, data can make it a lot easier to do this and to find these narrower segments. In San Francisco, they wanted to tackle the challenge of bicycle fatalities. We might have somebody from California here on the line who knows something about the Transpace project. They used data to be able to see and visualize where the majority of bicycle fatalities were occurring. And then it made it much easier to recognize that there were a couple of intersections and to really concentrate the problem solving on those intersections. So sometimes people like to refer to the 80-20 rule. If you can figure out where 80% of the problem is occurring, you can focus on solving that 80% rather than on the 20%, which might be much more effort for far fewer results, but allows you to begin to make change happen more quickly. And again, you can use engagement to help you to do this. In Indonesia, but also in Florida and in a bunch of other jurisdictions, there has been a project that they have been called Risk Map. Again, it's in the United States and a bunch of other countries, where they're essentially using feedback on social media from residents to pinpoint flooding. Long story short, it's basically used to essentially help pinpoint where is the problem occurring and when it's occurring, so that you can, again, respond more quickly with solutions here. Let me keep going here. So the next step in our process is to try, and this is the harder one, Brian, just to warn you here, is to really to describe the root causes of why the problem is occurring. So sometimes this is an exercise that's described as the 5 whys. The 5 whys was invented by the Toyota company and by the chairman of Toyota, who wanted to understand, how to improve production on the assembly line, and decided to go out to ask workers on the assembly line instead of management why certain problems are happening, why there are breakdowns happening on the assembly line, etc. And so they developed this exercise, which is frequently referred to as the 5 whys, to say, why is the problem happening? Why is that problem happening? Why is that problem happening? So let's interrogate you a little bit, Brian, and just see if you can restate for us the problem and explain to us why it's happening. And maybe people can help you here as to, and you can decide which of these problems you want to name, and then we can get some help with identifying those problems.
Sure. So let me see, identifying the problem of
the root causes of the problem here. Oops.
What are the root causes of the problem? The challenge is that there are multiple root causes of the problem. One is that some students may not have had a good fit with the institution they were attending. Financial challenges emerged. Life challenges emerged. I mean, there are people who, we know that for quite a few of these individuals that childcare is an issue. And so things along those lines, other life challenges emerged. So if I had to group them together, I think there would be a few large categories: life challenges, financial challenges, student institution fit would be my 3 large overarching challenges.
And you're getting some other suggestions in the chat here.
Yeah, and Deidre Richardson pointed out a good one. College readiness is another one that we could put academic challenges as a 4th large bucket as well.
Yeah, and then the short-term lure of an immediate job that seems to pay well now, and then the regrets later that you didn't finish the degree. So there's the short-term offer here. So the Kira says instant gratification, right? So there's a job. Why be in school right now? We're getting some other comments here, some political and otherwise. Degrees too specific, too vague, and not specific. So presumably people not understanding the career pathway. Why should I finish this degree? So the let's keep going here and ask you to take one of these and see if you can drill down a little bit further. So you pick one on this list, and then see if I can ask you why it's happening.
So I'll choose the financial one. Is so big. Let me choose the academic one. The academic challenges, as was pointed out by the person who submitted that, there are issues around college readiness, getting students ready for college. And we know that a lot of students come to college, whether it's 2-year or 4-year, underprepared, that their high schools, for whatever reason, whether the student didn't put forth enough effort or the schools didn't do enough to help the students be prepared, that there are a number of students, along with financial, this is often aligned with financial, there's correlation between family household income and students' college readiness. So whether or not, and so these things are all intertwined. And I would say that the academic preparedness is also a big issue that some could say is rooted in our K-12 systems and in trying to drive greater appreciation of what college readiness looks like. Unfortunately, a lot of the students, as I mentioned, there's correlation with low income. And a lot of those families simply don't know what students need to do to be ready for college, what classes they need to take in middle school and high school. And so So I think that's a larger issue that also definitely contributes to
Right.
this. Sure.
So your answers here and the answers I'm seeing in the chat are so varied. And you can hear, I think, when you say them out loud, the issue of you're not getting introduced in middle school to what it means to be in college, to colleges not providing adequate supports for low-income students, to, these are very different problems, which suggest very different solutions. But I would put to you that that's okay. And I'm going to share with you a slide in a moment that gets to this question of how do I pick among the very different root causes. So it's not to say that they aren't all correct, but there's going to be ones that you can better tackle than others that will make a difference. Again, it may be true that people are not getting prepared in middle school, but we may not, for example, from the Office of Higher Education, not be in the best position to do something about middle school, but you may be in a much better position to do something about how universities respond, for example. So though that's the reason we want to really unpack those root causes. Also, because the root causes that we may assume. So let's say you make this list of root causes and you say, okay, I really think it's what's going on in middle school, or I really think, to Sandy's point, it's the fact that kids want to go out and become influencers and YouTubers. My child wants to be a YouTuber when he grows up. He already is now, so he doesn't see, I think, why he has to go to college, because he thinks he can be a YouTuber, and he probably is right. But since we all can't grow up to be Mr. Beast, the most popular YouTuber in the United States, who makes millions of dollars doing that, it's going to be a really different, again, solution pathway depending on which one of these we pick, but also our assumptions may or may not be correct. So let's say you're approaching it, I have a Mr. Beast fan here, yay. Let's say you're approaching it from Sandy's perspective that young people today just want to all go out and be influencers and YouTubers, and they all want to grow up to be Mr. Beast. That if that's true, that's going to suggest a different pathway. Like maybe I need to go take out ads on YouTube and market to young people to tell them how they can both get a degree and be on YouTube at the same time. But that may turn out not to be the case. It may be, to Brian's point, that I'm dealing with very low income students who don't have parents who went to college or completed a degree, therefore have no preconceived notion about how they should move forward. Maybe they're in low English households. In other words, we need to test the assumptions, whatever it is we say the problem is. We really need to go out and talk to the people we're trying to help to make sure that actually is the root cause of the problem. So we want to make sure that we have some kind of a testing ground. We also want to be really careful to make sure that as we go about this process, we're not describing the problem by the absence of the solution. So let's say we're assuming what we need to do is to create YouTube ads to tell kids they should go to college and stay in college, or they should go out and get an apprenticeship or a credential of some kind. We don't want to define the problem as there are no YouTube ads that explain kids how to do this. That's what I mean by the solution, the problem disguised as a solution, is it's really easy to do that, and because we want to drive through the solution that we actually care about. So we want to have a process for really defining the problem and its root causes, making sure we're not using jargon and not using any technical terms, because we really want to make sure, especially the audiences that Brian is talking about, again, maybe kids from who do not, again, have a college degree, who are not in families that have a college degree, that may not come from an native English speaking household. We want to make sure that if we're really trying to test those assumptions, we're talking to people in a way that they can understand. At the same time, and now getting into some of my last points here, and then I want to get into some more of your comments and questions, etc. Is to really see if there is a way that we can look at the problem differently than we're looking at it now. So what do I mean by that? And before I even dive in on that, let me just call out a point in the chat. Clint, I think much earlier on, mentioned the idea of doing surveys with people to ensure that we've correctly defined the problem. And yes, that's absolutely one of the ways that we can go out and talk to people. It doesn't have to be, sitting in the church basement for hours with people or going out and doing extended interviews. You could do surveys or micro surveys, or there's lots of ways we can use technology now to be able to reach people cheaply and easily. And happy to share offline or we do a class on equitable forms of engagement, sort of ways that you can quickly and cheaply use technology to be able to reach out to people quickly. So let's talk about the concept of reframing the problem. And here I'm going to refer to an anecdote that some of you may have heard before. It's a popular one in the literature. It's the issue of the slow elevator problem. Does anybody here know the slow elevator problem? Someone who is not Cassidy or Graham, who have heard me say this before 10 times. Brian, do you know the slow elevator problem?
Do I know the slow elevator problem? No.
Yes. When I say it, you'll probably go, oh yeah, I know what I've heard that before. So the classic slow elevator problem, comes from this book. That's what I'm looking for. It comes from this book by Russell Ackoff called The Art of Problem Solving. Slow elevator problem is about the hotel manager whose guests are complaining that the elevator is too slow, hence the slow elevator problem. So he calls in the engineer, and the engineer says, oh, it'll be $1 million to replace the elevator. I don't know if anybody read the New York Times this morning. There was a piece about about a building in Manhattan that has 56 floors where the elevator hasn't worked since September. So I thought about this slow elevator problem. What I'm going to tell you is not a solution to that one, because there are multiple. This is a slow elevator, not a broken elevator, but $1 million solution to the problem. So the hotel manager, instead of calling the engineer, he goes and he calls the psychologist. And the psychologist says, can you guess? Can anybody guess? The psychologist says your issue is not the elevator, the problem is not that the elevator is too slow. Let me rephrase this. The problem is that the wait is too long and too annoying. So the solution, you put in a mirror for $5. So if you've ever been in an elevator that has Muzak or one of those quiz screens in it that has trivia on it, you know it's there because one of the reasons is it's cheaper to put that screen in and give you the Muzak and the quizzes and the mirror than it is to replace the elevator with a faster elevator. So that's the classic example of sort of reframing the problem, is to see if you can reframe the problem. So we don't have a lot of time here today, so I want to crowdsource this in the chat. You've told us there's a problem here with people not wanting to finish their degree, or not being able to finish their degree, or not wanting to finish their degree. We've talked about the idea of defining the root causes of that problem. I'm wondering if anybody can help us reframe the problem or see the problem in a different light than we may have talked about it up until now. Is there a different way of seeing it? And I'm going to see what, again, just to keep our time tight here, since we have a lot of people, I'm going to ask you to respond in the chat and to see whether people have any alternative ideas here that can open up the solution space. One of the reasons to do this kind of reframing, or one type of reframing, is what is sometimes referred to in the literature as positive deviance. So positive deviance is a term that was coined by two development professionals, Monique and Jerry Sternin, who worked for Save the Children. And they were tackling the very thorny issue of childhood poverty and childhood hunger, in this case in Vietnam. And so instead of looking at the problem of why children in rural villages were suffering malnutrition, they actually turned it on its head. The positive deviance comment refers to looking at the cases where the problem is not occurring in order to come up with ideas for what's working and better understand the problem. So it turned out there were certain specific districts in Vietnam where, again, they were very low poverty rates, quite similar to the other districts they were looking at, but where kids were not suffering from malnutrition. And what that uncovered for them was the fact that the parents in those districts were actually feeding their children smaller, more frequent meals each day, and digging up small snails and insects and other bits of sort of protein and putting them in children's rice, which was doing the trick to actually save their lives. Similar example, other example of positive deviance, as a guy you might have seen in magazines or newspapers sometimes. His name is Eric Schatt. He's in the news because he always wears the same outfit no matter what the weather. He wears a white polo shirt and khaki shorts. But that's why he's kind of infamous, but he's famous because he's a big data mathematician who works at the Icahn School of Medicine, looking at millions of genetic records to find people who have 2 recessive genes but don't have a problem. So instead of looking at, the millions of people who suffer from disease X, he looks for the 10 people who have the gene but don't have the problem to then better try to understand the problem. Or to take something closer to our own world, the work of Eric Kleinenberg, popular writer, probably best know him for a book called Modern Romance that he co-authored with Aziz Ansari. But before Modern Romance, he did this book called Heat Wave that looked at why certain people more than others suffered from the heat wave, died in the heat wave in Chicago about, when was that, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago now. He also looked at Katrina to really understand who suffered the ill effects of these natural disasters. The assumption is that it is low-income people who suffer the greatest consequences. The results of his work, and he's a sociologist, is that it's not about just poverty versus wealth. It's actually about loneliness. So in fact, it's people who are lonely, who don't have a community, who are isolated, who are most likely to suffer in a disaster, rather than people. So if you may be poor, but if you belong to a church, if you have community, if you belong to a community center, you're much likely to do better than somebody who is lonely. So all that to say, this kind of turning the problem on its head can sometimes help us to uncover solutions. Eric's most recent work is about the solutions. It's about the importance of investing in libraries and in public spaces, or what he calls civic infrastructure, creating places where people can go do bowling, etc. So I see lots of things coming in the chat. So before I go forward to the last points here, Brian, I just want to give you a chance to reflect on anything going on in the chat, anything that jumps out at you in terms of the reframing here. For example, I don't know who, I'm going to say V. Costiga, I don't know your first name, makes the comment that it's not that people don't want to, it's that people don't think they can finish. So that's a really, I think, interesting point, is that if it's about people not thinking they have the ability to finish, that might open up a really different set of solutions than the notion that people can't do it.
Yeah, I love that framing. I mean, I think the idea of helping people to, because I'm pretty sure that for some of these folks, there's simply a mental barrier that they think that, oh, either I can't find childcare or I can't find, which stems from some practical barriers, but there are some ways to get around some of those practical barriers. And some people just believe that they can't, or I'm too old. What would I look like going back to college now? Right. And so, yeah, I like that framing. Can you make sure that you send me? We will save
the chat for you, yes, and we're recording this, I believe, so we can save this for your team here. But you also see the benefit, by the way. I'll just point out something that I was going to tell you later, which is you see the benefit of doing all of this with a group. Like, it's one thing to sit down and do this for yourself or do this for your team, even with a small group, but opening these conversations up to people from different fields, from different disciplines, to the public, you get ideas. You've got people here on the line who probably come from all kinds of different agencies and different kinds of life experience. You're going to get really, really different reflections. And that can be, as you see here in 1 hour, a very powerful exercise. So before we run out of time, I'm going to keep going, but I want to just ask people if you have questions to please indicate so in the chat or by raising your hand, and to just get a sense of how many questions there are, and I'll sort of keep going, and then we'll go from there. So last, I think here, last kind of advice here, point about problem definition here, is we've talked about defining root causes. We've talked about defining it, defining it differently, narrowly, etc. Defining the problem upstream is another way to think about it. Now, you might have heard the word upstream a lot when the vice president went to Latin America to try to solve the problem of unwanted immigration in this country upstream, i.e., to go to where the problem is actually happening and to see if you can't stop it from happening in the first place. Great stuff in the media about this woman, Lori Wise, who has been very successful in the communities where she's worked at addressing the challenges of pet adoption. So most of us, when we think about too many animals in the shelters, in kill shelters, we see efforts to get us to adopt, right? Go out and adopt an animal in a shelter. Lori said, well, instead of waiting till an animal ends up in a shelter, let's try to figure out why the animal is in the shelter in the first place. And her work has revealed the fact that people are putting their animals or pets in the shelter, not because they don't love them, not because they don't care about them, but it may not surprise you to learn, especially after what's gone on over the last 2 years, is that people end up not being able to afford their pets. So they can't, it's a choice, pay for dog food or pay for baby food. And so the pet ends up in a shelter. So that opens up a solution, again, a sort of reframing here. I can give people dog food, I can give people cat food and avoid the pet ever ending up in the shelter in the first place. So as you think about your problem definition, do the exercise of root causes, but then also try to define the problem differently using positive deviance and try to define the problem upstream. Okay, last two things quickly here, and then I see we have, Graham, give me a sense of what we got going on here in terms of hands. I see Clint's hand.
That's
So
the
let me
one I
just
see.
say, okay, so Clint, I'm going to go to you in 30 seconds here. I made the point already, and I think I'll save this for later, that you can use technology to ask people what the problem is. We did an exercise with our Department of Education last year. It took us 2 weeks to hear from 17,000 people about what the problem was. We did it around future of work the year before. It took us 3 weeks. We got 6,000 people responding. This is a free tool that comes out of Princeton University. It doesn't have to cost anything to do this. And then there are lots of things you can pay for as well. But it can be a fairly quick process to ask people to test your assumptions about what is the problem, what is the root cause of the problem as you understand it. So we'll send this to you afterwards. But basically with your team, you want to develop a discipline for really trying to define what is the problem and trying to understand its root causes. And I'm going to end with this exercise here before I go to Clint, which we'll send you afterwards, which is it's just a different exercise in terms of what we've already talked about. And the guy who created it describes it as lassoing your problem. Really trying to figure out, have I defined something narrower that I can take action on? The one thing I want to point out to you on here that we haven't said already is the second S. Have I described a problem that will be supported? Or I've mentioned it, but I want to double down on this. There are lots of root causes to problems, but I'm not going to be in a position to solve all of them. So you want to ask yourself, what does my agency do? What is it that I'm passionate about? What is it that I can take action in the world? Even if there are other root causes you need to tackle, it doesn't mean that there isn't a root cause that's right for you in the position that you're in. Clint, let's go to your question or comment. If you can unmute.
Oh, sorry about that. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm trying to start the video too. So my question / comment is, and I know we're not in Germany, but you've used the reference of other countries, so I want to use the reference of Germany. And what Germany does throughout their schooling system is the teacher is very, and I know we're not in Germany, but they're very involved with the students, and they follow them basically through a program, and they help to determine what those kids are interested in what they're suited for, what they would do well with. So I think a solution to the problem, it's not going to be a solution to the people who have already left college, but maybe a solution to the problem in the future is making a better match with your students coming out of high school with the degrees that they're seeking. I know people just want to go for the degree that's in their head. Oh, I want to be a veterinarian. Oh, I want to be this. I want to be that. And you're going to get that no matter what. But maybe if an approach can be taken to reach out to them first and let them know all the rigors of whatever degree they're going to be pursuing, so they have it in their head, so that financially they'll be prepared for it. They'll know what it's going to cost. Mentally, they'll be prepared for it because they know what courses they're going to have to take. So it might be able to eliminate some of those things that you listed as being the chief problems to why people drop out. And that's just an idea.
Thank you. So that was a suggestion for Brian. So what I'm going to do here is just, whoops, wrong slide. That was the beginning. Let me go back to, I'm going to go to my, nope, not even the right deck. Sorry, different deck. That's my email. Let's try that again. All right, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to attempt the slides here because I want to give Brian a last word here. But what I will say to folks is what the last slides show you were just some of the resources we're going to send you afterwards. So make sure that you were signed up for today or that we have your email. If there's any doubt, send Graham a message. He will put his email in the chat. But what we'll send you is some worksheets, interactive worksheets that you can use, the ones that we've showed you here today, as well as some additional videos that you can watch to help you develop your problem solving chops and methodology. And with that, Brian, let me give you the last word here on kind of whether there was anything particularly useful that happened for you today or that you would take away to do with your team next time. If I can put you on the spot here.
This has been incredibly helpful. Just the leveraging the behavioral science angle to approach problems. I think it helps you come up with a better solution in the end. And so I'm already thinking about some great, I definitely want the chat. So please share that with me. But I will definitely incorporate some of this into our work moving forward. There are certain things that you're right, being able to problem solve in a large room with more brains helps you to come up with a more thoughtful and considerate kind of approach. So this has been incredibly helpful for me to take back to help inform how we'll move forward in this with this work.
Thank you very much for letting us put you on the spot as the guinea pig today, and thank you to your team. We have a next workshop coming up. I wouldn't miss it. It is with Lindsay Moore of the Behavioral Insights team, the Behavioral Insights America team. Some of you may have heard of Behavioral Insights UK. They created they were the original people to bring behavioral insights into government. And if you don't know what behavioral insights are, come spend an hour with us and hear about behavioral insights and how they can help you with your work. Cassidy, you put a link for people to sign up in the chat. Thank you. And we will share resources with you after the fact. And if you have any questions about your own work or projects, our team does what we like to call office hours, where we're happy to help you workshop and apply some of the skills that we're talking about to your own work and your own projects. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Beth.